Ken, are you wanting to move over there?
Mary's always looking out for you.
Let me get your foot up so I don't hurt it. Ready? There we go, sir. I got ya. Now I'm just gonna move this for a second.
Must be one that interested in the weather, I swear. I never seen such a crowd.
Isn't it fabulous? Do you want that first? Are you gonna be able to see the screen?
Is Lynn coming down?
She should be. I'm just looking right now.
I can go ask her.
Come on in.
The lines, yeah, I don't have lines here. So we're using scrub.
I'll sit way down, take everyone but me. You picked the wrong way. The way me.
Good to go?
Yes.
All right, great. So I'm just going to stand back here for a second and show you I actually have a face. I'm a human being. It's so nice to meet you all. And I'll try and speak loud enough. Is this okay?
No, yeah, great.
Someone want it louder? A little louder? Okay, that's great. I can speak a little louder. Well, thank you all for coming out today. I really appreciate it and hope to make this important topic a little more clear, because the news isn't always clear, and of course the politicians have their agendas and so forth. So I'm going to try and make it simple and clear. It's an important topic, it's a very pressing topic right now in the world, and something that is smart for us to all know a little more about and to pay attention to. Okay? So I'm Jonathan Logan. I'm Douglas Logan's son. That's my dad over there. Wave, Dad. There you go. So without him, I wouldn't be here today, so for a lot of reasons. So we'll just jump right in. What we're going to do is we're going to have 3 sections so that I don't go the whole 30 or 40 minutes without you being able to ask a question. I'm going to break it up into 3 sections, okay? And then after each section, if you have a question, well, we'll be happy to answer them. And then when we're all finished, some people may choose to go, but I'm happy to stay here and answer any questions that folks have, or just to chat about the topic more if you want, okay? Okay, great. Well, with that, let's see if this works. It does. So we're going to go through 3 sections: the science and the facts, what it means for our future, and what we could, or what we can and should do about it, okay? So we'll start right in. Part 1, the science and the facts. All right? People talk about greenhouse gases. Has everybody here ever seen a greenhouse before? A nice glass greenhouse, and it's got plants inside, nice and warm in the wintertime? Okay. So the Earth has gases around it that keep the Earth nice and warm. We're in what's called the Goldilocks zone. Remember Goldilocks? Not too hot, not too cold, just right. So the Earth has been just right for a long time. But we've been adding certain greenhouse gases, and they call them greenhouse gases because they have the effect of creating a greenhouse, warming of the Earth. Okay, it's like having in wintertime adding extra blankets or too many blankets, you get too warm. Okay? This is also really important to know. 100% of all global heating is actually due to human activity, to what we're doing to the planet. It's not part of a natural cycle, it's not the sun, it's not anything else. It's actually human behavior and the things that we're doing that are causing the Earth to heat up. Okay. I want to talk about the precautionary principle. Are there some doctors in the room? Any doctors? Okay, we have a doctor in the room. Doctors know the precautionary principle is a really good thing. You want to check and make sure that the patient that you have is okay. You want to take care of things. If you're not sure, you check. Well, the precautionary principle right now says we know the bridge is out ahead if we get the planet too hot, so we should do things to pull the brake and slow the whole thing down, right? That's the idea. We don't want to go plummeting off the cliff there. So we're used to, in our lifetimes, things changing in what they call linear manner, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, things change slowly and predictably over time. We're very used to that. Most things change that way, right? Children go from 1, 2, 3, 4 years old in a predictable number and manner. sort of like this, very easy. And most people expect climate to go the same way, 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees, 2.5 degrees of warming. Nice and easy and simple. I'm going to put that into context for you. If your child got a little warmer from working out or playing in the yard, or your grandchild, you think, okay, they're getting a little warm. But if suddenly their heat spiked up very quickly, you'd be worried, wouldn't you? Right? Of course. This is how almost everything humans understand and know works. It goes in a very linear, very predictable progression. Unfortunately, climate is different. It's different in a way of thinking and in the way it behaves. So what we want to know that the world isn't going to just be this nice linear progression out into the future with a couple of bends in the road. It's going to actually be very different. And it's going to work in something called exponential manner, okay? What that means is there's a sudden quick change. It moves along and then suddenly it goes up very fast, like a hockey stick. That's what climate does. And I'll explain what that looks like. So instead of that nice linear progression, it begins to change and then suddenly goes very quickly and changes fast and out of control. That's what we're worried about. Let me give you an example. Since we're up here in the northeast, we know that we can get ice on ponds or rivers, right? How many people have ever ice skated before? Anybody? Right? You know you don't want thin ice, right? You want nice, thick, solid ice. Because a sudden collapse of that ice is bad, right? At first you're out on the ice and then suddenly it cracks, and then you find yourself in deep underwater. We don't want that. That's what a sudden, abrupt change is like. It's fun at first, you're ice skating, but then suddenly you fall through the ice. It's not linear, it's exponential, and it happens quickly. The reason this is important is because when climate changes, it changes suddenly and quickly. And so what we want to do is we want to avoid this, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I'm going to give you a couple of facts. Carbon dioxide is measured in parts per million. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's enough to measure and keep the Earth warm. So for the past 12,000 years, carbon dioxide has averaged 280 parts per million. So that's sort of our benchmark. That's our Goldilocks zone, right? So you know that this is the temperature that all of humanity has arisen in, 12,000 years. Way back to the earliest times of all humanity in recorded history. We've had this wonderful, nice, very even climate, very moderate. 280 parts per million of CO2 sets the temperature. Now this is important to know. Temperature follows carbon dioxide. So when carbon dioxide is low, it's nice and cool. When it gets too high, it gets very hot. So in greenhouses, they add carbon dioxide because it helps the plants a little bit, but they make sure the temperature stays cool. We can't control the whole planet, so we want to keep this number low. So carbon dioxide has been below 300 parts per million for 10 years. In other words, it's gone up and down a little bit, right? It's natural to go up and down a little bit, but it's never been above 300 parts per million for 10 million years. That's important. But in the 1750s, we started the Industrial Revolution. So we began burning coal, gas, and oil. And what happens when you burn coal, gas, and oil is you get CO2 as a byproduct of burning, right? That's what happens when you burn things. In the year 2000, the Earth's CO2 passed 367. So you can see we're past a number we've never seen for 10 million years, and we're way past the 280 parts per million, right? So we can see the difference. That's a huge jump, right? But the problem is it hasn't stopped because we keep burning more coal, oil, and gas all around the world. And the United States burns a lot, but so does China. So do the people in Africa. So do the people in Europe. So everyone's burning all this coal, oil, and gas. And in fact, if you look here, we passed 421 parts per million in 2021. Well, that's way far away from that. That's a lot hotter. I put it in red for effect. I hope that helps. Okay. So here's just a little visual graph. You can see all this time. It's really nice and easy right down there around that 280, below 300. The Industrial Revolution comes along, and suddenly there's this giant hockey stick effect. Again, immediately rising up. And with the CO2 rises the temperature. Remember, they go hand in hand. So what's happened is, since the Industrial Age, we've had this massive, giant leap in both CO2 and in temperature. Okay? That's not a good thing. Now this is kind of a crazy chart, so I'm going to explain it to you. This is the temperature here, right? Thousands of years, the temperature's doing this up and down. These are the ice ages and the hot periods in between. And then this extends out, so you can see for the past 12,000 years here, 10, 12,000 years, we've had this nice, steady environment and climate in the world that has allowed us to spring out of all those places in the world where we started civilization and have a modern world. Well, the problem is that you saw that hockey stick, it goes up like this. We're now going past 1.5 degrees here, 1.5 degrees Celsius, and then we're heading towards 2. Here's the problem with 2 degrees Celsius. At 2 degrees Celsius, most of the food we eat doesn't grow well. We start losing food and the ability to grow food at 2 degrees Celsius. We're on our way towards 4 degrees Celsius, and at 4 degrees Celsius, none of the food humans eat grows. So that's a problem, right? We can agree that no food is bad. Okay. This is a visual representation. I know there's probably some artists in the room, some people who like art and visual stuff. This is a visual representation of how temperature has changed from 1850 to 2017. You can see it was much cooler in the past, and it's much warmer now. And if we added the 4 years that we have records for since 2017, it'd all be this dark red stripe right here. That means it's getting hotter all over the planet. Here's another way of looking at it in the graph with both the actual temperature changes and the color change there. Is that kind of clear to everybody what's going on?
Yeah. Yeah.
This is bad. This is good. This is bad. Just so we're clear. Okay. So, do we have any questions so far? Yes.
What has brought about the changes?
Great question. So, prior to 1750, we burned a little wood here and there to keep warm at night in our hearths. But right around 1750, we discovered that you could actually burn coal, and then eventually oil, and then eventually gas, and it would be much more productive and a lot easier than chopping down trees by hand. And so we began this process. That happened at the same time that we started to develop steam engines and things that could use that to become more productive. So today, oil, coal, and gas burning is the equivalent human effort of about 500 billion people. In other words, coal, oil, and gas, by working machinery and cars and things like that, is the effort of about 500 billion people. So we're putting a huge amount of that CO2 into the atmosphere. Yes?
No.
So you're saying that it's gone up since you were young? Yeah, that's right. Since during all of our lifetimes, CO2 has continued to skyrocket tremendously. I was born, thank you for that. I was born when in 1962, CO2 was 317 parts per million. Again, now we're over 420. So it's a dramatic rise. And in case anybody doesn't know, the first person to ever consider the idea that CO2 could warm the atmosphere by burning coal, oil, and gas was an American woman in the 1850s. She was a scientist. And she warned, but nobody would listen to her. How many women have felt like they weren't listened to? Exactly. Right? Exactly.
Who was it?
I don't remember her name. I think it's something like Cheryl Elliott, I think. I can look it up. Any other questions? Okay. We're going to go to part 2. Part 2, what it means for our future. So there's a lot of consequences that happen when you heat things up too much. It's like overcooking food in the oven. It can burn. So we have to be honest with ourselves. One of the things that the news likes to do is it likes to soft pedal problems, especially when a problem means we have to change. Nobody likes change. So what happens is the news wants to give us a little bit of the information, but they don't really want to tell us the whole story because it would mean a pretty significant change in the way we do things. So for example, let's look back at World War II. We knew that Japan was a problem and that Hitler was doing these terrible things in Europe, but we didn't know what it meant for us in America. Most people didn't know. They weren't really following it back then. But suddenly when Pearl Harbor hit, everybody paid attention, right? Because it was a big, important event. Similarly, you can look at what the terrorists were doing before 9/11, but then on 9/11, everybody starts paying attention because it's a big, terrible event. The challenge with climate, again, is that it happens suddenly like those events, but by the time it happens, it's too late to change it. So what we want to do, like that train, before it has that crash, we want to pull on the brakes and stop it before it gets too bad. okay? So we need to be honest about where we are. At 420 parts per million, 2 degrees Celsius, that's +2 above before we started the Industrial Revolution. So above where we were, +2 is already baked in. That means we can no longer avoid it. Let me give you an example, and it's a terrible example, but it's clear to everyone. If I were to jump out of an airplane without a parachute, at first it would feel like I'm flying. But then I'm gonna have a sudden abrupt problem, right? The ride is great until the end. And so that means that the minute I fall out of the airplane, it's baked in that I'm gonna hit the bottom. Same kind of thing. We've baked in a lot of problems already. We're currently on track to hit +3 degrees Celsius by 2075. Doesn't seem like a lot, but if your grandchild had suddenly a +3 degrees Celsius, which is about, I believe, 7 degrees Fahrenheit, you'd be worried because she would have a terrible fever and need to go to the emergency room. The problem that this means is that things are going to get worse, hotter, and sooner than we think. The climate that we're living in today, the weather that we're living in today, was not thought to happen until 2100, back in the year 2000. So 22 years ago, they thought what we're experiencing today wouldn't happen for 100 years. But it's happening much, much sooner. That's because it's unpredictable, like the ice. Currently, we're on track for what scientists call 4C, +4 degrees Celsius, the worst case scenarios. In other words, we're not doing anything substantial to slow the increase of carbon dioxide and prevent the future train wreck. In fact, we're accelerating the train towards the broken trestle. That's a bad thing. Now, what I want to explain briefly is that when they say +2 or 3 or 4 degrees Celsius worldwide, they mean average all across the whole world. But the ocean is 70% of the planet's surface. And we all know in the summertime, where do people want to go when it gets really hot? They want to go to the ocean or the lake or the river. Why? Because it's cooler at the ocean or the lake or the river, isn't it? Right? So that means that inland, it's a lot hotter than the average. It can be much, much hotter. And these numbers don't need to mean anything to you except it can be so hot that birds fall from the sky and that fruit and vegetables drop off the vine and off the tree, which is what happened last summer where I live in Oregon. We were a full 40 degrees warmer than normal for 3 days. 40 degrees. Yeah.
No. Yeah.
Okay? Right, stuff falls off the trees and the temperature gets too hot. Right. So that's what happened to us. We lost $10 billion worth of food and farms in 3 days in June. And the farmers had to wait till this year to replant their crops. They couldn't get a second crop in. So this is what happens, and it's a sudden event that happens, and it goes through like a Hurricane Ian just did down in Florida, and it causes huge damage and destruction. That's what we're looking at. Now, we're also accelerating towards a bridge where we don't know where the broken trestle is. Is it around the curve 1 mile away, or is it 20 miles down the road? We don't know. Donald Rumsfeld called those the unknown unknowns. In other words, imagine that you were standing at the 1 yard line on a football field looking all the way down the football field, and you know there's 40 landmines out there. Well, you probably wouldn't go running down the field because you don't know where they are. And so we're dealing with the same thing. There are what we call hidden tipping points. A tipping point sort of like is the straw that breaks the camel's back. That's one too many. What that means is that if it gets too hot for too long, we might actually change the whole climate of the planet permanently for hundreds of thousands of years into a state that humans can't grow food. So that's what we're worried about. Small changes have a huge consequence. This is what's called the bell curve. So that's an average, right? You hear about the kids getting graded on the bell curve and try and make it so that all the C's and B's are in the middle. This is normal, and then what's happening is we're shifting towards hot. You can see in the beginning, there's a relatively equal number of cold and warm days, but as we shift just a couple of degrees, there's a huge number more of hot days. Is that relatively clear? Do we get that picture? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's what's happening now. We're shifting this way, and if we keep shifting, we're gonna get all hot. Okay, this is the part I made before. This is the average of the whole world. You can see it's going up. This is the average of just the land. It's a lot hotter on land. And the further inland you go, the hotter it gets relative to the average. What does that mean? Well, we don't grow food on the ocean, we grow food inland. That's the problem.
What happens to the fish in the water?
Fish in the water can get too hot, and then the fish can't breathe anymore. So that's one why fishermen are so interested in what's going on. So right now we're at plus 1.3 Celsius above that 1750 number, okay? Only 1.3 Celsius. Remember, we've already baked in all the way to 2, right? I can explain it to you later, but fundamentally we're at 1.3 and we can stop no closer than 2. We might get hotter, but we're at least gonna hit 2. Here's what's happening at 1.3. In the country, 2022 is on track to be the hottest ever recorded. In the western half of the country, we get fires and droughts. In the eastern half of the country, you get floods and storms, right? Ian, giant flooding everywhere and so forth. Here's what that looks like. Drought across the world is happening now, higher than ever. These countries there's billions of people that live in this region right here, and they're suffering radical drought already. Come on in, ladies. Can we help them find a chair?
Sure. Yeah.
The next thing is fires, terrible, terrible fires. In fact, the fires are happening so often now that last Christmas time, last winter, there were fires in Colorado during the winter that burned up over 900 houses. My niece lived in and amongst those, and her parents-in-law in Colorado lost their house to a fire in the dead of winter. It's kind of mind-boggling to have fires in winter, isn't it? That's what happens. And of course, sea level is rising and ice is melting. This looks really strange, doesn't it? Aren't these dogs supposed to be on snow? Well, they're having record temperatures in the far north. That's melting all the snow much, much sooner. Winter is now 60 days less in the Arctic than it was when most of you were born. And summer is 60 days longer. This is what's happening. And then of course, this is just Ian, right? Just terrible floods. These are the things that are happening. And of course, if this continues by 2050, 340 million people will be threatened by floods in 2050. Let me give you an example about 2 degrees Celsius. The temperature I said was locked in already. If we ask, what does that mean for us? Here's what it means. In the geologic history, 8 times in the past several million years, we've reached 400 parts per million of CO2. That means 2 degrees Celsius. That bakes in 10 meters of sea level rise. Not today. It takes time for the ice in the Arctic to melt and in Greenland to melt and so forth, but eventually the sea will rise by 10 meters. That's 30 feet. Every single time we hit 400 parts per million or higher, every time we hit 2 degrees Celsius or higher, we get a minimum of 10 meters of sea level rise, 30 feet. So that means all these cities around the world are going to be inundated with water, flooded with seawater. And if you're into national defense, just remember, the Navy has $1 trillion of bases at sea level. Now they can move the ships will float with the sea, but that means they have to move $1 trillion worth of US Navy bases. It also means that we have huge crop losses and probably close to 1 billion people will not have food. It also means millions and billions of animals will die. In Australia, they lost over 1 billion animals in fires 2 years ago. Last year in the Pacific Northwest, we lost 1 billion animals to the heat because they can't survive in that much heat. Many animals can't sweat like humans. Like on a hot day, we sweat, right? Most animals can't sweat, so they just die. And then, of course, there'll be huge heat that people can't live in. So in the tropics, we all know the tropics, right? In those areas where there's palm trees and beautiful islands, plus all the areas of Africa and South America and across the Southeast Asia, those are called the tropics. In the tropics, you can have a temperature increase and a humidity increase, and that together makes it so that humans can't sweat, they can't cool themselves, and they will eventually die. That's what they're concerned about. And of course, people are going to flee. Syria, you may have heard of a civil war in Syria for the past 10 years. In Syria, over 5 million people fled the country because of droughts that had lasted over 10 years. When we expect to see over 1/3 of the world in drought and food disappearing, you're going to see billions of people moving, migrating. So what's all that because? Climate destruction, ecological destruction, because of what we are doing to the planet itself. Let me give you a couple of examples. Humans, when you were born, oops, I went one slide too fast. Let's see if I can bring that back. There it is. Okay. Today on Earth, 60% of all the mammals are farm animals. 36% are humans. That's a big beach with tens of thousands of people on it. Only 4% represent wildlife in the world anymore because we've taken everything. We've chopped down the forests, we've taken their territory, we've pushed them out, we've had our own animals. So when you were young, these were probably switched. But the world has to feed 8 billion people now. So we're gobbling up literally most of the planet. And that's leading us towards Earth's 6th mass extinction. Now we've had 5 before, caused by volcanoes, giant meteorites wiping out the dinosaurs, those kinds of things. But this one is the humans doing it. That's us. And you can see species all around the planet are beginning to be at risk of going extinct. You know, insects, our pollinators, the things that pollinate half our food that we eat, right? 41% loss already, right? And so all of this loss is happening around the planet. Our leaders, our politicians, the people that meet globally to represent us at the UN and other places have said, oh, this is a problem. We had the Paris Agreement a couple years ago said we're going to stop at 1.5 Celsius. We won't let it get to 2, we won't let it get to 3, we're going to stop at 1.5. The problem is they all shook hands and patted each other on the back and went to dinner, but they're really pledging and targeting us to hit 2.4 degrees. Well, we lose half the food there. But they say that's okay. They're still going to eat. But what's even worse is that, have you ever heard a politician say one thing and then do another? Anybody? Right? Happens all the time. Well, what they're doing is actually putting us on track to go somewhere between 2.9 and 3.9, 4 degrees. That's what they're doing. So they're not really keeping their promises, are they? No. And who they're not keeping their promises to isn't us. We're older. It's to the kids and the grandkids. That's who we owe this to. So we're accelerating down that train track towards 4 tipping points. Now this is really important to understand. These are the landmines out there on the football field that we don't know where they are, but we know they're there. These are really big. Any one of these could tip us past 2, 3, or 4 if we trigger them. It's like lighting a fuse to a bomb. We don't want to do that. We hear those 4. First, I'm going to explain one thing. I have to explain to you a feedback loop. So a feedback loop is when something happens that triggers something else that makes it worse, okay? So when we start out with the Arctic ice up here, right? The Arctic Sea is usually covered with ice. When you were young, this was covered with ice most of the year, completely. Now it's mostly not covered by ice. What happens is, we've raised the temperature by raising the CO2. That in turn has melted the ice, and that leaves open, dark ocean water like this color. This reflects a lot, this absorbs a lot. A white car in winter stays cool. A dark car in winter, when you get inside, it's nice and warm, right? Because it heats up. Same thing with the water. This is a feedback loop. The more that the ice melts, the more open blue ocean there is, the more the ice melts. The more open blue ocean there is. You see, it's a cycle, right? Mm-hmm. That's a feedback loop. Here's the problem. We've got a bunch of feedback loops. One is that as the ice has melted and left the surface, the water down below gets heated and releases methane that's trapped on the floor of the ocean. Methane is like CO2, only 86 times warmer. It creates 86 times more warming than CO2. So this is really bad. We don't want this to melt, and we don't want it to bubble up to the surface. What does that look like to you? Bubbles? It's already happening. So this train is beginning to go off the tracks already, and we have to do whatever we can to stop it. The second one is the permafrost. 1/6 of the entire world's surface is filled with permafrost. Now we all know wintertime, you can get frost in the ground. Well, up in the far north of Canada, Alaska, and Russia, it's permanently frozen year-round. It's called permafrost. Unfortunately, because of the heating of the planet due to our fossil fuel burning and the CO2 rising and heating, the permafrost is now melting. Well, what's wrong with that? Well, the permafrost is basically one giant compost pile, hundreds of yards thick. It's made of compost, basically, plant material. And as soon as it unfreezes, if you can see here, it's greening and so forth. Well, bugs get it, bacteria gets it, begins to decompose just like a compost pile, and it gives off CO2. So as this melts, the whole north is beginning to give off CO2. The fuse on this bomb is lit also, unfortunately. And then, of course, cutting down our beautiful forests, whether it's the rainforest in Indonesia or Australia or in Brazil or Africa, we're cutting down the rainforests. Why is that bad? It's bad because forests normally store carbon right here. See the tree? Wood is made of carbon. So when you have forests, they contain the carbon. So the more the forests grow, the more they pull carbon out of the air and put it into making a tree itself. That's what trees are made of, it's mostly carbon. The problem is if you cut down all the trees, they're no longer taking carbon out of the air. So you're cutting the cycle of carbon out of the air into the ground away, and now it's staying in the atmosphere more. So the more trees you cut down, the worse global warming, global heating gets. Well, of course, we're cutting them down at the most rapid pace ever. And then finally, this is the tricky one, so I'll explain it. And if I have to explain it twice so we can all get it, that's really important. When you burn oil and coal, it puts off soot, right? We all know that. Remember, we used to have soot and we had acid rain, right? Well, it puts off soot, which creates pollution. What happens is that pollution rises up into the atmosphere, that soot rises up into the atmosphere, and it forms like an umbrella. So you know if it's really hot out and you put an umbrella up, it shields you from the sun a little bit, right? So the sunlight that you see out here today is 10% less than the sunlight you saw out there as a child, because there's so much pollution that we have dimmed the skies. Is that a bad thing or a good thing? Well, it's both. The fact that it's dimming it means that the earth is heating less. But the problem is we have to stop burning the coal and the oil, so we're going to stop making the aerosol, the pollution in the air, which means that eventually it will come out of the air in about a year or two. So, but what it basically means is this. Once we stop burning oil, coal, and gas, we will lose the umbrella, which means the earth will heat faster. So this is the other one that we've lit the fuse on, and it's the one that terrifies scientists because they said, we have to stop burning the oil and the coal, but if we stop it, we lose our umbrella, and it heats up faster. So it's a catch-22. So here's what a 4 degrees Celsius world looks like. So 4 degrees above that time when we didn't have oil, coal, and gas in 1750. Much of the world between the tropics becomes uninhabitable or desert. That's a hard pill to swallow. That's a horse pill to swallow. And the habitable zones become Northern Europe and Russia and above in Canada. Because that's what the world looks like historically anytime we've gone above 4 degrees Celsius. This also terrifies the scientists. So we have to do everything we can to pull on that brake so that we don't go shooting past 2 degrees. There might be a question or two.
Why is it so difficult for people to understand this? I mean,
It's a good question.
I just get amazed.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really important question. I think the reason is because they're not getting this information. They're being told other things by the press and the media and so forth. They're going to be told, it's okay, keep doing what you're doing. Don't stop buying big cars and burning gasoline. Keep the thermostat turned up. It's all going to be okay. Just keep buying stuff. Instead of saying, we're going to have to change. Essentially, we're the chicken inside the egg, and we have to break out of the egg if we want to become, have a future. Does that make sense? Okay, I think the lady in the back was next.
I have 2 questions. One, you were saying that what you call the pollution.
Yes.
But it kind of reminds me of what they used to call the greenhouse effect, where so that also traps the heat and keeps it in. You're saying that if so that makes it actually hotter. But then you're saying that if it's gone, then the sun can come in, and then that makes it hotter. So, which are you saying causes the most damage? But the other question is, so Bill McKibben's new, his big effort is to have people to basically divest of fossil fuel stocks.
Yes.
And actually write to banks that are funding the fossil fuel industry.
Yes.
Pipelines and all, and to write to them and let them know that you're doing that.
Yes.
So that seems like a good positive thing to do, and people can do it online, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's one of the many good things to do. Bill's right on the money. He's really smart. He's ahead of the game.
Some of us didn't hear that. Could you interpret the question?
Sure. So she asked 2 questions. The first question she asked is if CO2 is causing it to be warmer and we have that umbrella on top, why does one make it warmer, one make it cooler, essentially? And the second thing she was saying is that Bill McKibben, who's a very famous science writer with the New York Times, has written several books on climate, has suggested that we divest or divest from all the fossil fuel companies. In other words, talk to your broker, tell your investment person, whoever, to pull their money out of Exxon and Mobil and Gulf and so forth and BP. So no more investing in fossil fuels and any funds that I'm in, so that those people's stock will go down and they'll change their behavior.
It's
Okay?
actually bigger than that. It's the banks that are funding the
Yeah.
fossil fuel industry. We all have bank accounts.
That's
And
right.
we can all choose to take it out of Chase, which is a big funder of fossil fuels, and put it into a green bank.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's a big list of things we can do. Yeah, yes?
I read, I think online, that Greenland's icebergs are melting faster than I expected, and this is gonna cause a rise in the sea level of the Atlantic Ocean, and probably, some of our cities are gonna be in danger.
Yes, that's exactly true. That's exactly true. So what she said was that she heard that Greenland, which is about the size of Texas, if not a little bit bigger, is close to the size of Mexico. The ice is melting on Greenland, which can have up to 1.5 miles thick ice or 2 miles of ice, but it's melting very, very quickly, faster than they expected, and that all that melting going into the ocean can raise the sea levels, right? The answer is absolutely yes. As much as 7 meters of that 10 meters I talked about is because of Greenland. And it's happening far, far faster than they expected. Yes?
I know this may seem like a plant since I'm your sister, but I have a good question
All
for
right.
you. And also I'd like to also just say thank you so much, because I know that, Jonathan, you are used to talking to people unlike me and maybe some of our audience members here who really do have more of an understanding of what you're talking about. So thank you for making this at least a little more understandable for people like me, so I can ask a question like this. I think in reference to this gentleman's question, it's also, I think there's an interesting, your question was, how do some people just not get this? How do we
Right.
not all know this? I think there's also, and Jonathan, maybe you can explain, a real difference in looking out the window and seeing what today's weather is,
Right.
and understanding what climate is. So I think climate and weather are
Yeah.
two different things, and that may help explain why some of us look out the window and say, hey, it's Christmas and there's snow on the ground. There's no global warming. This is beautiful. This is,
Right.
Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. So there's a difference between weather, which is what's happening outside today, or 10-day weather forecast, and climate, which is the long-term trend. So today's weather might be here, and tomorrow's, and tomorrow's, and tomorrow's. But long-term, over decades and centuries, climate goes up and down wildly within a range. Before, it used to be below 300 parts per million, so it'd be really nice and cool. But now the climate has been getting warmer and warmer every decade. Okay? So while today it might be sunny outside, there's a year, I remember a couple of years ago, it was 64 degrees in Central Park on Christmas Day. When most of you were children, that would be mind-blowing. But because it's going up slowly day by day, and the weather doesn't seem to change very much, but the climate is changing radically and quickly. Does that make sense? Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, yes? So, if I understand you, are you saying that things are changing over time, things are going up, 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 and up?
Yeah.
Okay, that's exactly right. So the change is happening over time. Was there a question over here? Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how disinformation
Yeah.
and corporate greed and
Yes.
so on have contributed to the fact that people, like, plastic recycling is a prime example.
Yeah.
There's greenwashing all over the place.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah, so that's a very good question, thank you. So she's asking about, what about the fact that there's so much misinformation out there? I know it will surprise you all, but some politicians and some corporations don't tell the truth. Anybody surprised by that? No, of course not, right? And so it's very hard to get people, it's very hard to get people to admit that something they're doing is causing someone else a problem when they're raking in so much money, right?
Right.
We've seen this time and again. Remember the cigarette companies were saying smoking is just fine. They would get doctors to be in the ads when they knew it was causing cancer, and they denied it and denied it. They even hired a company, a consulting company, to create advertising to fool people that smoking was okay when they knew it caused cancer. And they paid billions and billions for that crime. Okay, so that's exactly what's going on with oil, coal, and gas. They have known definitively since 1960 that continuing to burn coal, oil, and gas was going to cause radical, disruptive, terrible climate change that would affect the whole planet in the future for children's children. How do I know they knew it? Because the American Petroleum Institute, they should know, right? Exxon, Mobil, Gulf. The American Petroleum Institute actually had a study done by, I don't remember if it was Stanford or MIT. Some scientists did a study. Well, what about this whole global warming thing? Is it real? And is it because of us and the CO2? And the answer came back, yes. Yes, it is. And they took that study, and they just took that study and they put it in a drawer someplace and locked the drawer. And then they began to lie about it. Right? Even when we had meetings in Congress in 1970, in 1980, and beyond, they continue to lie about it. They're still lying about it today. Why? Because it is the single most profitable industry in the world.
That's the point, profitable.
Profits. It's about money. So they're going to keep lying to us. They're going to create disinformation. They create all these fake groups to put out more information. They have people online in the different Instagrams and Facebooks and all those online social media to lie, because it's so profitable and no one holds them accountable. So they're just going to keep doing it. So we have to decide, and we have to be the change. Did that answer it?
Yes, sir.
Isn't the EPA doing anything?
Well, the EPA has done some very good things, and they are doing some good things. It's just that with each administration, one administration moves them 2 steps forward, and the other one pulls them 3 steps back. Jimmy Carter, remember Jimmy Carter, right?
Oh, yeah.
Some people loved him, some people didn't. He was actually a hero and stopped a nuclear meltdown in Canada. That's a story you should research. But Jimmy Carter actually looked at it as a scientist. Remember, he was a scientist, a nuclear scientist. And he said, boy, this is really going to be a problem. We don't want this. We should start putting up solar panels and make America the beacon of renewable, green, clean energy and stop all this terrible fossil fuel problem that we're having. And of course, he was voted out of office. And then the next administration that had 8 years, or actually 12 years, did everything they can to stop that. Even pulled the solar panels off the White House. So America was the leader in the world on green technology, and we've now ceded that to China, unfortunately. So the fact of the matter is we can do a lot, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but we must take action now because we can already see where the bridge is broken ahead of us. Okay, so we'll go on to our next section. This is a shorter section. What can and should we do about it? What we can do and what we should do is everything. This is our World War II moment. There will not be a second chance. Hitler could have won in Europe and we would have had a second chance. Hitler could have taken America, not that we would have let him, but if he had, we still would have had a second chance to beat him and not kick him back out because we would have still been here. But if we fail here, we may not be here in 100 years, or 200 years, or 300 years. We don't know when. We know the landmines are out there, and we know we're marching toward them. So the point I want to make is that back here, we could have, in 1980, when Jimmy Carter was in office, we could have just taken our foot off the gas, like driving. Literally could have gone off the gas a little bit and just slowed down nice and easy and made that beautiful transition over 20, 30 years like he suggested. We didn't do that. Instead, we knew there was that giant cliff up ahead and we accelerated towards the cliff. So every year that we wait, we get worse and worse and worse, and it makes the change that we have to make harder and harder. So it could have been easy here. It's really a steep, radical change here. So we have to be able to make those decisions, and we don't have any time left. Now is our time. So when you hear about people saying, we only have a few years to make a decision, you're like, well, what's the problem? It's a beautiful day outside. It's equivalent to, I would say it's equivalent to cancer. We've all heard of, or maybe we've seen, someone having cancer. Now, if you knew that you had stage 1 cancer, if, God forbid, I had stage 1 lung cancer, I would want to stop it at stage 1, wouldn't I? I wouldn't just go, well, we'll just wait till it hits 3 or 4. No, we stop it right away. The problem is we didn't stop it at stage 1, stage 2. Now we're at stage 4, and we have to take radical action to change our behavior, or we're in real trouble. This is important. The struggle to avert catastrophic climate change is bigger than all the other struggles, whether it is slavery, democracy struggle, the woman's right to vote, and so on. I would argue that if what is at stake is securing life as we know it, then there can be no bigger struggle than we face. I met Kumi. He's an amazing human being. He's from Africa. He's a human rights and civil rights and climate rights person. He was former Greenpeace executive director. The reason why I bring this up is there's so many issues. You can't turn on the TV without there being an issue about this and an issue about that. What I'm trying to tell you with this presentation is they don't matter now if we don't take care of climate. Because if we don't take care of climate, no one's going to give a hoot about any of these other issues if they can't eat. They're not going to give a hoot about any of these other issues if the Hudson Valley gets to 120 degrees in the summertime. This is the one that if we don't stop this one, we'll never solve the other ones. And I've got friends who want to talk about different issues, and you know there's so many issues right now. And that they're important too. And what I tell them is spend 20% of your time on those issues, but spend 80% of your time making sure those issues are still around 50, 60 years from now. Because this is our Pearl Harbor moment, whether we know it or not.
Excuse me. I think one of the major problems is somewhere along the line, somebody is making a lot of money
Yes.
off of it going in the wrong direction.
That's right. That's right. And there's a second piece, which is that there are always people who just don't believe it. I know people who just don't believe that smoking is bad. They know somebody who lived to 95, never had any problems with smoking. And because of that one person, they think they too can chain smoke 2 packs of cigarettes a day. Well, we would all say differently, especially our doctor would say differently, say that's not a good idea. So there are always going to be people who don't believe for whatever reason. They're going to be like la 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 like a 5-year-old in the backseat of the car, right? They're just not going to believe no matter what you tell them. What we need to do is influence each other first, and our friends and family and our politicians and so forth, and the people that will listen. We don't need everybody, we just need enough people to change the game. So 6 big things we should do. Now there's probably 600, but we'll just talk about a couple. We need a World War II level of effort to transition to a zero carbon economy. In World War II, in a matter of 48 months, the United States responded to 2 world wars, one on either side of the world, and we won both of them. We put 12 million men and women in uniform in 48 months. That's the equivalent today of 35 million people in uniform in 48 months. We built 86,000 tanks. We built over 1,500 warships and a couple of thousand merchant marine ships. We made over 500,000 combat vehicles and 750,000 artillery pieces on a country with only 137 million people, most of them living in small towns and agrarian. And we built over 300,000 airplanes. We didn't have enough pilots. So nobody can tell me we can't do something. When we put our heads together, when we decide to go do it, we can get it done. And we can stop this train from going over the cliff. Did you have a question?
Well, what it takes is total effort of everybody on the same track.
That's right.
And backed by governments who are on the same track.
That's right. You're right. That's 100% true. Just like in World War II.
I'm running for president.
You're next.
I'll vote for you.
Number 2, we can't do this alone.
My boys. They're my boys.
We can't do this alone because pollution from China goes to America, pollution from America goes to Europe, pollution from Europe goes to Africa, and on and on. And we all live under the same sky. We are finally at the point where we are one giant human species. I wish that an alien spacecraft would fly across the sky one day. We'd all see it so we'd recognize what we have in common instead of what we have different. It's what we have in common that will help save us. And what we need to do is we have to help the rest of the people in the world, just like America has always done, so that they too can have the transition to carbon zero. Because if they burn all their forests, and they burn all their coal, and they burn all their oil, it won't matter a hoot what we do. So we have to do this together, and we have to help them. We have the knowledge, we have the expertise, we have the finances, we have the industrial capacity. We can do this. Next is we have to reduce consumption of needless consumer goods. We've all bought into the consumer good tornado that happens. Just go to any garage sale, and you'll see it there spread out on tables and blankets. The fact of the matter is, what makes you happy are your friendships, your relationships, the time that you spend together, your loved ones. That's what makes you happy. It's not the trinkets. Trinkets equal oil, coal, and gas. They're made with oil, coal, and gas. They're mined and shipped with oil, coal, and gas. We have to really cut back on the consumer train if we're going to not go over the edge. We should shift to a Mediterranean diet. It's healthier for people and for planet. Our doctor can probably tell us all about that, hopefully. But the fact of the matter is a Mediterranean diet, you can look it up, you can ask about it. It's probably part of what you get here because it's a very healthy place. Mediterranean diet will dramatically reduce the carbon footprint of those of us in the upper third of the world. The next is prepare for big changes. We're going to have big changes. We're going to hit 2 degrees Celsius, which means we're going to have massive changes around the world. There will be millions upon millions of migrants. We need to prepare to take people in. We need to educate them. We need to feed them. We need to take care of them. They're our brothers and sisters around the world. And if we don't, then we have to prepare for war. So we either prepare for kindness or prepare for war. And those are our 2 choices. I prefer to prepare for kindness. We're going to have to make changes in the way we live, in the way we talk to each other, and then in how we run the world. But we can do it. We've done it before. Your great-grandparents didn't live in this world, and yet look at all the change that has happened. They didn't have telephones, electricity, cars, TVs, none of that. But yet they seem to do all right. We need to figure out a way to turn our modern economy into a postmodern but very happy, sustainable economy. And finally, we have to make this our #1 priority. If we don't make this our #1 priority, then we're done. And like you said, we have to do this together. This is a together thing. If we had said, you know, if Roosevelt had come on TV, or radio, pardon me, on radio on December 8th and said, you know, what the Japanese did was terrible, and I promise you by the year 2025, we're going to get rid of them, people would have laughed him out of office, right? It's like a doctor saying, hey, you know, Dave, you're smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day. We need to put together a plan. And Dave said, that's great, Doc. I'm gonna start smoking 1 less cigarette each year. Well, that's not going to work, right? That's not going to work. But we have to prepare to get involved, and we have to make it our #1 priority. Vote for people only who are educated and committed to fighting climate change. #2, get involved in any way that feels right for you. I love the ideas that came from the back of the room before. They were wonderful. And then donate appropriately to politicians and or organizations that are aggressive about making the change. Because frankly, they need money, because the oil and gas companies aren't giving it to them. We must act now. This is it. We're at day 0. We're out of time as a community, as a country, as a world together. And like it or not, the changes are going to keep happening. If we don't make the change our kind of change, then we suffer the consequences of not doing the right thing. It's up to all of us.
Nice.
Questions?
Thank you.
Do you have any questions? Yes.
How much hope do you personally have?
We didn't hear the question.
How much hope do I personally have? On a good day, I have tons. On a bad day, I'm a little depressed. The fact of the matter is, we have to really influence each other. We have to make our personal decisions and do our best. And there are days when I'm very depressed when I see new numbers come out that are worse. And I hear people saying, there's no problem, it's sunny out. I'm like, oh, that's not how it works. So I have good days and bad days. And I know the importance of this. I'm sure in World War II, people had a lot of bad days. And they struggled a lot, and they sacrificed a lot. And they were depressed when Hitler was rolling across Europe, right? When Tojo and the Japanese were rolling across, you know, the Pacific Islands. But they said, you know what? We can do this. We can do this. It's going to be tough, it's going to be hard, it's going to be extra work, but we can do this. And that's what gives me hope.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes?
The other way is to make sure that we vote intelligently, that we vote for people whose ideas are not personal, but what is for the common good.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's very important. So when it comes to voting, you have one issue. As far as I'm concerned, I have one issue. If someone doesn't agree with what we've talked about here today, I won't vote for them. I don't care who they are. I'll vote for someone else who does. Because this is the #1 idea. And government has such a big muscle, such a big budget, and such a capacity to make changes today, right? So we have to rely on that.
So, do you know about Proposition 1?
In New York? No, I'm in Oregon, I don't.
Okay, so Proposition 1 is on the ballot, and it's billions of dollars to work for green energy and so on.
That's, yeah, vote for Proposition 1.
Right, turn your ballot over. It's on the back of the ballot. Turn your ballot over and vote for Proposition 1.
Proposition 1, New York is a yes.
Yes,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
I think also speaking and, thinking about how things get all wrapped up and going back to the politics part, how things get all wrapped up in bills and how we wanna try to tuck something else in there and we're gonna slip in something about this and maybe climate's in there and we'll only accept this if this other, something with another group is included, let's say, rights of some sort, whether it be, voting rights or LGBTQ rights or whatever it may be. And the thing that I think is an interesting analogy as far as that goes is thinking about a horrible crash has happened and stretchers are coming into the emergency room. And we've got, a voting rights issue here, and we've got, an LGBTQ issue here, and we've got,
Yeah.
so Jonathan, do you know that analogy?
She's talking about the idea of prioritizing. How do we prioritize amongst all of those? And if we forget the idea of just vote for climate, then we can look at a different schedule. So, for example, if you were an emergency room doctor and a patient comes in, she's on a bicycle, she got hit by someone who was texting and ran a light, she comes in and she presents with her femur bone and her legs sticking out. That's not good. Her arm is all broken all over the place with compound fractures. And they do the x-ray of her body, see if there's any internal bleeding. There's not, but she has a small lump of, maybe a second degree cancer or something like that, stage 2 cancer in her lung. And then of course her eyes are rolled back in her head, she's got a big bruise here and she's bleeding on her brain. The doctor's gonna know which one to operate on first. The brain, because if we don't save her brain, the rest don't matter, right? Isn't that true?
That's correct.
We would just take care of the brain first, because if you're dead in the brain, you're done. So they take care of the woman's brain right away. Climate's the same way. There's gonna be a lot of other issues. Maybe someone's gonna say, well, our school taxes are too high, or we have to vote for the gender equality thing over here. We have to, those are all really important perhaps, and I say perhaps. And it's perhaps because if we don't vote for climate first, if we don't hold our politicians to talking about it, frankly, honestly, and openly, the seriousness of this, the December 7th, Pearl Harbor serious of this, then they're not serious politicians, and we have to hold them to it. So that's how we would vote. We would vote on that one thing, most importantly, and make sure they're held accountable. Now, if you have two politicians both agreeing with what we talked about here today, and they have other issues, by all means, vote the other issues that are important to you. But make sure that they handle the one big issue first. Because it's the only real issue that matters, sadly, but it's the truth. It's been left to us to do. Could have been dealt with back in 1980, could have been dealt with in 1960, but we didn't. We kicked the can down the road, and we're now in an age of consequences and decision making. Does that answer it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yes?
You're from Oregon. Has your state adopted some of California's policies?
Yes. Oregon and Washington, California are all adopting very aggressive climate policies.
And you don't want any cars that have used fuel?
We're all looking at, I think we're all turning it so that by 2035 you can't sell a combustion engine vehicle in Oregon, Washington, and California. So it's a little late for my taste. I'd say 2030 at the latest, but everybody's gonna move that number back and forth where they want it. But 2035 is certainly a number, it's on the table, and the way California goes, pretty much the auto industry will follow because they're the #1 biggest market. So by adding Oregon and Washington into it, we're just stacking up the numbers. But hopefully we'll get it all done.
Is there a difference in California than in the other states?
I don't think there's a difference between California, Oregon, and Washington because there's a compact. They've created a state compact, multiple states agreeing on it together to kind of push the industry. But hopefully other states like New York and Vermont and Massachusetts and up in Connecticut maybe will join too so that we can get a groundswell, because then you create a market big enough that the automakers and the other people will just have to switch.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, any other questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit on the question of nuclear power? People are very frightened of it,
Yes.
and yet I've heard it said that that's really the only way to generate power that's going to be environmentally.
Yes, that's a really good question. So what he asked was, what about nuclear power? There's some people who are very afraid of it. There's some people who are okay with it. There's a lot of worries. the fact of the matter is nuclear power is kind of an option. The problem is not the way we've been doing it, number one, and number two, not if we can't get rid of the fuel, which is radioactive for 500,000 years. And we haven't solved either one of those problems yet. It's also far more expensive than anything else we're doing, right? So right now, nuclear power is like 20 times more expensive than solar or wind. So the question is, why would we do it? Well, people say, solar doesn't work at nighttime, and wind doesn't work. It's not very windy out there today. Perhaps wind energy would work. We'd be without power. Well, the solution to that is to have a whole lot more solar and a whole lot more wind than you need on a particular day, and then you store that energy in batteries, in giant batteries. And that's being worked on right now. Nuclear energy is a very seductive thing because it sounds good. The problem is the cost and the waste. For the price of enough nuclear energy to make us 25% sustainable, we could be 100% pure, clean, without nuclear, sustainable, and help half the world too. That's how expensive nuclear is. Every nuclear project that's been started in America for the last 20 years has been abandoned because of cost. The public wouldn't even allow it going forward because the ratepayers were getting soaked with extra money, extra bills. So every nuclear power plant has failed because of that, yes?
Okay, but I've heard it said that low pressure sodium cooled nuclear power generation is cost effective, doesn't produce radioactive waste, actually consumes it, and is in fact possibly capable of being instituted now.
Yeah, the Chinese have developed what they call a modular reactor. That's sodium. There's also several other things like a thorium reactor, pellet ball reactors that the Germans developed. There's a number of other models out there, but they're yet unproven. And the time it would take them to get through a regulatory process, we could already have solar panels up and giving us all the energy we need. So the nuclear energy industry is going to do whatever it can to stay viable and keep their money stream going, just like the oil industry. The fact of the matter, they haven't cleaned up their room yet. We've got 60 years of nuclear waste sitting all over the place, all over the country, and it's a huge problem. In fact, with Fukushima, remember the Fukushima earthquake and tsunami that caused that huge problem? They still haven't been able to fix that. They've still got nuclear waste sitting in pools that are leaking into the ocean. So until they can clean up their own mess, they shouldn't start a new one, right?
Right.
Yes?
Did you mention climate smart new Paws to anybody?
I don't know about climate smart. What, do you want to tell us about it?
Oh, yeah, there's this organization, and they've actually gotten the silver designation for New Paws by getting New Paws to reduce their energy consumption. Through solar, through all these things that you're talking about, all these solutions, they're actually pushing for them. So everyone is welcome to join Climate Smart New Paws. In fact, we really need
It might be
help.
great to have a speaker
Yeah.
from Climate Smart New
Yes,
Paltz
that's a
come.
great
That's a great
idea.
idea.
Love
Okay.
that idea. Because it's one thing to hear about this, and we've all learned something, all of us have learned something from you today, Jonathan. But I think it's quite another thing to then be able to leave the great room and be able to go back to our rooms and say, hey, wait a minute, now what am I gonna do?
Yes.
Is there a liaison or somebody locally who can
Yes.
energize and educate the population? I think that's would
I
be a
think
really
that's
cool
a
idea.
natural next step is to have them come in and speak.
Yeah.
Climate Smart is having a community meeting tonight
Ah,
at the community house at 7 o'clock where they are presenting their strategic plan for New Paltz. So if
We-
there's
we
anybody
can-
here
we
who can
can-
go, that would be great.
They're gonna have a presentation. Climate Smart New Paltz is gonna have a presentation tonight at what time?
7 o'clock,
7 o'clock in the
community house.
community house. Is that here on campus?
No, it's on Veterans Drive.
Okay.
but I think it'll be Zoom too, right?
I don't know that, but.
Yeah, I'll find out.
That's the kind of great
Okay.
thing about getting the liaison to then, for people
To
who are
come
not
here.
in their, to have it right there on that TV screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
That's a great idea. Thank you so much.
And thank you.
And thank you. And thank you all for coming today.
Thanks.
We really appreciate it. And if anybody wants to just sit around and chat about it, I'll be staying for another half an hour.
I'm here all week.
I'm here all week, take the waiters and waitresses.